Welcome back to A Closer Look. While it may seem inconceivable to most, senior citizens are often a target for scams to rob them of their money or identities. Here to share some insight on how to prevent seniors from falling prey to scams is Scott Smudzinski, supervisor of FBI Norfolk's White Collar Crime Program. Welcome to the show.
Good morning.
Why is the FBI prioritizing elder fraud cases?
Well, the FBI, our mission overall is to uphold the Constitution and protect the citizens of the United States. And back in 2017, the President signed into law the Elder Abuse Prevention and Prosecution Act, which essentially provides resources to federal agencies such as the FBI to bolster their cases and investigations involving fraud that affects the elderly. It enhances our victim assistance programs and basically enhances the penalties that are involved in the types of violations that are affecting our elder population.
Now, why are the elderly more of a target to scammers?
Well, let me first say that all of us as citizens are vulnerable to scams. So not just pointing out that the elderly are particularly vulnerable, but there are sections of that demographic because of maybe mental deficiencies, dementia, or Alzheimer's, that they are more vulnerable than the rest of the population. So several different variables would include that portion of our society has accumulated a significant amount of wealth. They have money and assets because they have been working their whole lives and have been saving. Some other things are they are not as technical, generally speaking, as the younger population. So in using the internet, they may not be aware of what would be a red flag to some sort of fraud or misinformation. Other things such as later in life, they may be more disconnected from family and friends, and a sense of loneliness plays into their human need to connect with people. So those are just a few of the many variables that cause them to be vulnerable.
That makes sense, definitely. What are the most common types of scams that you're seeing here in the Hampton Roads or Chesapeake area?
Well, the number of scams is voluminous, and they all vary. One can be tweaked to look like something else. So there are generally different main categories. For instance, the use of the telephone, the internet. Back many years ago, TV and radio were used. But some common scams are telemarketing scams, what we call romance scams. I'll focus on a couple of these in a minute. There are technical support scams, a money mule scheme, what they call an affinity scam, also a caregiver scam that has been really affecting and in a very personal way our elder community lately.
And I know, like, even I get phone calls like, you know, the IRS is, if you don't call this number, that kind of thing, and I've sort of immediately just disregard it, but a lot of people may not do that.
Right. So what the perpetrators are doing is they're using these social engineering techniques to provide you or provide the victims with a very limited amount of information that effectively convinces them to provide information or take direction from them, which ultimately ends up in a financial loss.
And once that happens, how difficult is it for someone to recover from that?
Unfortunately, by the time law enforcement gets involved, whether it be the local police or the FBI, it is more likely than not that the funds are going to be lost and unrecoverable.
Now, have you seen an increase in senior fraud or maybe fraud in general since the internet? You know, I know, like you said, a lot of times the senior community is not that familiar with the workings of the internet.
Yes, there's one particular fraud that plays on the emotions of our seniors, and which I mentioned before was the grandparent scam. This is something where the perpetrator will use the telephone or an email to make contact with the victim, and they purport to be a close family member, a grandson or a granddaughter, and they play on the emotions of the victim, stating that they're in a very significant bind and they need financial resources to get them out. Now, part of this is they do a good job of convincing the victim that they shouldn't tell anyone because they don't want to upset their parents. And ultimately, because of the information and how good the schemer is in convincing the victim, ultimately money usually gets sent and then is not recovered.
And they basically prey on the trust of someone.
They do. That particular generation grew up in a period of time where they were more likely to trust their fellow neighbor and family than maybe today.
Right, which is unfortunate that those times have changed. And I've even read where someone can manipulate like a caller ID.
Yes, that is also a frequent technique that's used because of the new technical capabilities of voice over internet protocol. Spoofing different telephone numbers that show up on our traditional caller IDs is very easy today. So the lesson is that you should not trust what you're reading on your caller ID.
And you know what's interesting is I just learned that researching for our interview. I would have never thought that that would be a concern or something that I would have had to worry about. And I'm a little bit suspicious of things as a rule.
Right.
So I would have never imagined that that would be something that I would have to be concerned about. So I can only imagine someone who does have a lot of those factors that you mentioned earlier, you know, they're more vulnerable in that situation.
Yes.
Now, what advice do you have about how people can avoid becoming a victim of a scam?
So it's extremely difficult in today's world because the amount of information that's coming at all of us, including our seniors, is more than we can get a handle on. So the advice that I have, just like I would give to anybody and in many situations when it comes to being victimized, is to educate yourself. And more than anything, our caregivers and our elderly population, their children and grandchildren should constantly engage in conversation about the advances in technology, the types of vulnerabilities that people face, and the type of schemes that are out there. Because the main issue here is that you can provide people with information, but oftentimes our elderly citizens do not want to listen to that information. They don't believe they're being victimized. We have sent agents out to the field and had made multiple contacts with victims, advising them that they are being victimized and they should not send any more money to these individuals. And we find out that that falls on deaf ears and goes, it really does not become an effective means. So it's just persistent education. The second thing is, as soon as you are aware that you have or potentially may have been victimized in a way like this, you need to report the information, whether it be to your local police, to the FBI. We have a Internet Crimes Complaint Center. It's www.ic3.gov, is where all of our internet complaints go in. That collates that information. It's often hard to pinpoint a single subject or perpetrator based on one complaint, but in totality, we're able to look holistically, nationally, and even worldwide. The third thing is a little tip to those iPhone users. You are able to set that phone to a do not disturb setting. In one of that configurations, you can allow the phone to only ring to your contacts, so that if you would like to put in all your family members, your doctors, or your trusted contacts, and insert that into your contacts list and switch that do not disturb on to only allow your contacts, that's a technical hack that maybe could prevent some of those robo-dial calls or fraudulent calls from coming in.
I'm going to use that tip because that's good information. So thank you so much for coming on. This is good to know, and I think it's important too for our elderly population, for us to look out for our loved ones as well, to make sure that they're not being taken advantage of. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
We have to take a quick break, but up next, find out how to register your child for school without leaving the house. Don't go away.